Hello and welcome to the first monthly edition of the CISO Roundtables, Tales from the Trenches. Today's episode is titled, Hope is Not an Effective Security Strategy. My name is Dustin Shores from EITS, and our guests today are Brad Gorka and our very own John Davis. Brad is a cybersecurity professional that has been in the trenches and built organizations for several major global companies across the tech and transportation sector. But most recently, he was the deputy CISO at Norfolk Southern. Prior to that, he was the vice president of information security at CommScope. John Davis is our director of security consulting and leads the cybersecurity division here at EITS. He has an extensive knowledge in infrastructure operations as well as cybersecurity solutions within state, government, private healthcare, manufacturing, defense, and aerospace industries. Good day, gentlemen. It's great to have you both here to chat about some items of interest going on in the industry. A couple of the topics that we're going to talk about are the advancement of menaces a CISO is facing daily, including ChatGPT and other AI, why a strategic security is more important now than ever, referencing the federal cybersecurity strategy, the human element in the corporate security structure. So, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, I mean, what keeps me up at night is just trying to, I think a lot of it is we don't know what we don't know. And unfortunately in security, we have the impossible task of trying to protect everything. And it's really tough to know where everything is at. And, just mapping where all the assets are at and, business going out and spinning up new cloud infrastructure applications. And there's a procurement element related to that. And so, that's kind of what keeps me up at night is just, have we really protected everything? Have we put our defenses in front of all the assets? Because if there's something that you forgot, the bad guys are going to find it and they're going to find a way to exploit it. And so that's what makes the challenge so tough for me.
What about you, John?
Yeah, to expand on what Brad said, on the defensive side, you have to be perfect all the time. And I mean, for an attacker, they just need to find, one little weakness and, they can exploit it. But I mean, what really keeps me up at night, it would be mainly the users. You can do as, good a job as possible trying to train the users, make sure that, they can see and detect malicious threats before they potentially click on them, stuff like that. But some of the stuff we've been seeing recently, I mean, it is pretty advanced, and I mean, it is tough to train all the users on detecting those advanced threats. And another one that would keep me up is really visibility into the infrastructure. Um, Brad hit on it a little bit, but if you're not aware of those devices out there, you can't really secure it. And depending on what type of infrastructure we're talking about, sometimes it's difficult to get the logs for those and to be able to parse them, to be able to detect threats, stuff like that. So that those would be kind of the main things.
All right. And so, one thing I want to talk about is a little bit. So, you both are barbecue enthusiasts. So, I thought it might be a great kind of opportunity to talk a little bit about kind of your interest there, maybe how it even connects to cybersecurity.
Sure, I'll take it first. It's I've been a hobby of mine for a couple years now, and I've experimented with different kinds of smokers and processes and meats and stuff like that. And for me, barbecue is a process, and I really appreciate and enjoy the journey. I like hanging out in the driveway with friends and family while everything's getting ready. There's a lot of preparation that goes into some of these different things that I cook, and with the ultimate goal of producing something that tastes amazing. And I think security is really there's some correlations there because it is a journey. You can't just hire a bunch of people. We got a huge shortage of people, so that's tough to do anyway. But even if you could wave a magic wand and hire a huge team and add tons of money to the budget, the organization is only going to move as fast as the organization is going to move. They've got other objectives going on. And a lot of these control objectives that we're trying to do, they just take a long time. There's a lot of process analysis and process building that goes along with that, and it takes a while. And it takes a long while to get to the point where you really feel confident that you've got all your bases covered. And it requires a lot of thought and often some experimentation as well. And I do that sometimes intentionally and sometimes unintentionally. You have a piece of meat that just doesn't turn out good, and that's okay. So you got to kind of sit there and think about, well, what didn't go right with this? Was there an issue where the temperature spiked? Did I rush it? Was the meat not what I expected it to be? And so you just have to tinker with stuff like that. Even the type of wood that you're going to use to smoke certain types of meats can totally change the outcome. And in security, I think we got to be willing to tinker as well. And I tell my team that all the time. It's like, don't get stuck in analysis paralysis, or don't have an expectation that we need this to be perfect on the first go. Let's get through it. Let's come up with something that we think is going to work pretty well for the organization and for us. And if we get it wrong, if we got to make little tweaks along the way, that's totally fine. And so I like to look at it from that perspective.
I'm also a big barbecue enthusiast, but I think you did a very good job kind of tying it back to barbecue. So maybe I can tie it back to another one of my hobbies, which is alligator hunting. But exactly like Brad said, it really is process, procedures, basic stuff, not necessarily the most fun stuff, but whenever you're first getting started, it's kind of overwhelming, and it is difficult to realize that it's not going to be perfect the first time. We're going to have to go through iterations. Same thing whenever I first started out. There's a lot of different processes that I've kind of improved over time. Some of the stuff I go through is, some prep work. So, one, you want to really find the spots where the alligators are. So before the hunt, you would want to, really kind of prep your gear. It's stuff that I don't necessarily use all the time. So, just make sure, lights are working, other stuff like that. You want to plan your hunt. This is something you don't want to do solo. And it's one of those things I've run into where, whenever I've talked to people about it, everybody's like, oh, I want to go. And whenever it comes to crunch time, it's hard to find people to actually get in the boat with you. So, so you got to plan it. You conduct the hunt. And then I also like to have after action reviews. What went well? What could I do differently? Like I try my best to bring two different types of gear for pretty much anything I need. Because no fail that either something I won't be able to find it at the time or something like that. So, but tying it back to cybersecurity, I mean, it really is processes and procedures along the way, and I think prior planning really helps.
Thanks for sharing. Those were two great analogies. I appreciate it. All right, so I'm thinking maybe we should talk a little bit about why is a strategic cybersecurity plan more important now more than ever? Thinking of the federal cybersecurity directive we mentioned earlier, and then also too, I'm just thinking of like the Chat GPT. Any
Okay.
current or relevant issues?
So I mean, cybersecurity is more important than ever, just due to the ever evolving threats. So the cyber criminals have been around for several years now, and they're getting better with the tactics that they're using, and they've really honed in on what works and what doesn't. They've honed in on how they can make money, and they really view it as a job. I mean, it is their 8 to 5 job that they go in, and it's all of our jobs to make sure that we defend the companies that we work for, and also our personal information. And there's a lot of little decisions that go into this. Choosing a password, like what policies we want to follow, stuff like that. So I think that's a all right summary on why it's important. How about you, Brad?
Yeah, I mean, excuse me. Things like CMMC and NIST-CSF and some of these other great security frameworks we have out there at our disposal are really meant to help us be strategic, because different businesses are facing different challenges, risks, and threats, and those frameworks, I think, help remind us, like, hey, you may have this really big deal going on over here that's important, but you need to be thinking about these other 6 things as well, because you get so busy focusing on kind of the big rocks that you can lose sight, or you need a reminder to come back and deal with those at some point. And I think these strategic use of these frameworks in our strategic plans really helps me out, helps me stay organized, and plan out from a maturity perspective where we're trying to get to in the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, whatever. And those continue to just be super important, and it also helps us articulate what we're doing to executive leadership and the board of directors, so they know how we're measuring ourselves. They know what the plan's going to be. And naturally, a lot of these are so focused on risk management that as new risks and threats come up, if you're doing these programs right, you're doing the risk assessments and you're doing the threat assessments on a periodic basis, and you're staying on top of the new things that are coming out. As a hobby of mine, over the past couple of months, I've been kind of messing with crypto pig butchers. It's a type of fraud that's been around for a while, and it's just really prevalent on social media right now. And so I've just kind of been interacting with some of these people to dissect what their approaches are. And just recently, I found where they are evolving and are now using things like ChatGPT and other AI text-based solutions to improve their communications and improve their profiles' authenticity by using things like that to author original material and content for their social media profiles. And we're going to continue to see that. I mean, the days where we get these phishing emails with tons of misspelled words, bad punctuation and grammar, and all these telltale signs, I think those are going to rapidly disappear. And we've already seen articles about this, about what you can do with ChatGPT to write a great looking phishing message. And so our users are going to have to continue to be more savvy and more sophisticated and just more aware. And that's really what I try and do in the security programs that I run, is drive that culture of security to make it top of mind for everybody. And it's not just, well, let's talk to you about what, some of the latest phishing tactics are right now, because those are going to evolve. So we've got to just raise the overall level of awareness and savvy so people can stay a step ahead of the bad guys, because they're going to keep evolving and we've got to evolve with them.
And so one thing I'm thinking about is kind of with that awareness, how do you see kind of getting that message out there?
Different things work for different people. And, I've worked for organizations that have 15 to 20,000 employees. You've got frontline workers working in factories, and, all people from all different walks of life and different countries, different languages. And I think, I like to have an employee on the team that's all they do is security awareness, and they're interacting with the people in facilities and in IT and HR and all these different groups to just increase the types of message delivery that we're utilizing, in the hopes that we'll reach everybody somehow. In the factories, it might be posters that we put up. If it's the finance team, it might be going to one of their finance department town halls to talk to them, put a couple slides up and just be available to ask questions. And you've just got to do that to try and meet your customer where they're at. I know that's kind of a cliche-esque kind of phrase, but that works. And so each company is going to have different methods you need to use, and each team's going to have different methods. And I try to focus on groups too that have specific threats. For the HR team, we need to educate and train them on some of the risks that are specific to them, like payroll fraud and changing wire instructions and bank account instructions. For the accounts payable and accounts receivable team, they need to know about all the AP and AR fraud that's out there. And so when they get an email that looks like it's from one of our vendors saying, can you change our bank wire, they need to stop and they need to think about that and follow the process, notify their manager, so we've got to work on those things, and I take a risk-based approach to that. And for the stakeholders in the organization that face threats on a more frequent basis, we need to invest more time with them and with their leadership to really drive awareness. And for other folks, or maybe it's a little less, we tailor the time required and the material accordingly to them.
If you don't have those processes in place, if it's just hard to think about that sometimes. You kind of assume that everyone's at the same level, and that they won't click on something, they won't change the payroll information. They would follow up, they would I guess that they would have that kind of security experience and knowledge. And I don't know, it's not always true. There are lots of companies that still experience the email compromise and stuff.
All right, John, I got another question for you. I want to keep talking about the Chat GPT for a second. Are they safe to use? And if so, what are some of the measures that you would put in place from a company perspective that would, make them more secure?
I mean, you can absolutely have Chat GPT come up with malicious wording in emails, and you can have it kind of dynamically create this wording to so that it's not sending the exact same thing to everyone at the company, stuff like that. I think the security controls are kind of similar to what you should have in place. I mean, there should absolutely be some front end filter that has some heuristic based detection for for phishing attacks, for spear phishing, stuff like that. One of the things I found helpful is whenever you notify users that the email is coming from an external address, just that little, notification, kind of gets them thinking about it. Hey, could this be malicious? I've never received communication from this person, so maybe I should take a second thought about how I interact with it. Another way for Chat GPT is you could absolutely write malicious code with it. And that really digs into more, where the AV industry has gone, several years ago, is signature-based detection just does not work. And it can't work. I mean, it's too easy to come up with new signatures to be able to like tweak a little bit of code and change the hash where it just will not work. So that's where user behavioral analysis really comes in. And I mean, with good software doing user behavioral analysis, you should be able to clearly identify, what is normal behavior, and what is weird behavior that it should not be doing. For instance, ransomware is decently easy to detect if you have proper tools in place. I mean, they all pretty much do the exact same thing. They're all, creating a new file, encrypting it, copying contents in there, deleting the old one. And I mean, once you do that a couple hundred times and you've never seen that activity before, there should be a red flag. There should be some control in place. Kill that process, disable that user, restore from backup, stuff like that. Because I mean, it should be pretty glaringly obvious that something is going on with that many, with that many file operations in that short of a time that has never been seen before.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a wake up call that we're gonna, as an industry and as a profession, we're gonna have to up our game again. The tools are just gonna have to keep up with AI somehow, and I think we're seeing some good progress in AI capabilities on the detection side. There's a number of vendors that are, I think, really kind of leading that, and we're going to have to continue to support and drive those types of technologies and invest in those types of technologies, because we're not going to be able to beat it. We can't beat AI without our own AI helping us out on the security side. And so that's just going to be absolutely critical going forward. There's, the companies that make this types of technologies, I think it's somewhat incumbent on them to kind of police or manage the ethical use of these types of tools. And I know when Chat GPT first came out, people immediately jumped on there and were demonstrating how you could do some kind of bad stuff with it. And so, as a society, are we going to allow that? Now, of course, the bad guys are going to have their versions of it soon enough, and there'll be underground markets where you can build these and sell a subscription to it, and there will be no ethical restrictions on tools like that. But for at least the ones that you can just go create a free account while you're sitting at home, what are we going to do to kind of manage these things ethically and try and limit what you can do? And I've done that on ChatGPT a few times myself, where I've thrown questions at it that are a little questionable, and a few times it has come back and say, I'm not meant to do that type of work, or I'm not here to go look into these things you've asked me to review or summarize or research for you. So we're starting to see that, but I think potentially when these things get released, people get caught off guard with all the things you can do with it and all the capabilities that really are there. But I promise you that one of the things I excel at is thinking like the adversaries. And I promise you, when they see something like this come out, they don't think about all the beneficial and good things you can do with it. They say, how can I use this to exploit people better, or to commit fraud in a better way? Brett Johnson and I were just talking about that recently, and that's where their heads are going to go to immediately, and they're going to start leveraging it very quickly.
One of the scariest details about this is that bad actors have been found inside of these engines we're already using now. Any thoughts about that?
Well, that's what I just had talked about a few minutes ago with the crypto pig butchers. I mean, they're already doing it. And I went out there and found a couple of AI detection engines to, paste in this chunk of text that they supposedly wrote, and to see if it could analyze it and determine the probability that an AI system wrote that or not. And those detection technologies they've got to step it up very quickly. I mean, you've probably read the articles about ChatGPT being able to pass a bar exam, and other professional examinations with a very good score. So the detection technology is going to need to progress very rapidly, especially getting these things into the hands of teachers and people in academics, because you could just paste in your final exam for your history class, and it could give you a great response. And so much of this stuff happens with business and with school. So much of it's being done remotely now. It's not like the teacher or the exam proctor can just watch you sitting in the class to see if you're doing something you're not supposed to. So these detection technologies really need to step it up and be available broadly.
Yeah. I was just reading an article this morning about it was a Chinese shopping app. I think it was like Pinduoduo, something like that. Had malicious software in it. And it had been out there for years or so, and had not been detected for malicious software. So, and especially like apps like this, they don't necessarily have to have the code where whenever it's in the App Store, you can analyze it and find the code. I mean, they can download, they can sideload stuff in. There's a lot of skeevy things that these companies can do to get around the security tools. But I mean, this one was just interesting just because it was such a widely popular shopping app. You wouldn't think you wouldn't think it would have malicious code in it, but yeah.
So one thing I'm thinking about is just let's get kind of back to the conversation of the human element in the corporate security strategy. What are some strategies that you're seeing that really addresses that human element?
Brad, I think both of us have had the opportunity to come into an organization that had very little security controls and kind of build it out from scratch. And so one of the challenges I had is I don't know, I didn't really have a class on how do you do this? How do you kind of start from very little or nothing, and build out a world leading security program. So I kind of took a step back and reflected, and the number one thing that I hit on was we have to have policies first. Like one, you have to have some kind of structure in place. You have to tell users what is acceptable and what's not. And um, with those policies, like you can really help address the human element of security, because I mean you're clearly identifying what is acceptable and what's not. Should you be allowed to use your work computer for personal use during lunch? It's like, I don't know. I mean, if there's not a policy, then what, they can really do anything, and there's another threat vector that you have to account for. Um, and then, I mean, kind of expanding on that, to address the human element, you really need to focus on training. So you need to focus on, not just phishing training, but just overall training. What do I do if my computer's acting weird? What do I do if I do receive some email that says to change this bank information? And it really does boil down to basics. It really is policies and procedures, and your users following them.
Human element for me, I mean, I see it as on two paths. One path is, John, like you were saying, setting expectations for all the employees and contractors and frontline workers, everybody else in the company. We've got to set expectations, and you absolutely nailed it. If you haven't set expectations, and just whatever goes, and sometimes they're doing things that are totally legit, not a problem. Sometimes they can wind up doing something accidentally and become a non-malicious insider. And then occasionally you could have somebody that does have malicious intent that is going to abuse the latitude or lack of process, lack of policies, lack of controls. And so you've got to make sure that all your stakeholders in the organization, you're setting expectations on what's okay and what's not okay. And this can be a bit of a struggle with HR as well, but there's got to be consequences for it too, and that can be tough to negotiate with the employment law folks in the legal department, with HR. If you've got works councils to deal with in Europe and some other countries, there's unions sometimes you have to deal with, but you really have to make sure people know that there's consequences to this, because their failures or shortcomings or whatever can have a multi-million-dollar consequence upon the company. And so you got to really reinforce with them that we're serious about this. It's that important. The other human element for me is building that culture of security within the IT function, the legal function, procurement, executive leadership out there in the business. And that human element to me is, I like to go visit with people in the business, to have one-on-ones with the senior leader within the HR function or within the finance, the CFO, to make sure that they know that I'm always available for them 24/7, no matter what comes up. If you've got a concern, if there's a risk you're worried about, let's talk about it. And I'm going to come to you and let you know kind of what I'm seeing and what's going on. You've got to build those human relationships with those people, to really make sure that everybody is working on it as a team, because we cannot do this just in our little security function. We usually, wish we had more people than we've got anyway, and are stretched thin, and we just can't do it all. And so we need, everybody to be thinking about it. That includes people that are just writing software. Hey, this is serious. If you make an error while you're coding something and it gets put into the compiler and comes out the other end as packaged software, that could have really severe consequences. And so you got to drive that culture of security from the top all the way to the bottom, to make sure everybody's got this top of mind, and that they're being really cognizant of it, no matter what their job is. Even if you're ordering plastic resin, you may say, well, who cares about that? It's just plastic resin. There's no software in it. I don't need to worry about that. Well, yeah, how much of this stuff does the factory have on hand to continue production? Well, they'll say about 36 hours. Well, if they can't ship plastic resin to us for 36 hours, then what happens? Well, we've got 3 plants that'll become full stop. Okay, Well, if they have a ransomware attack or some other, issue, that could happen. And so we need to think about diversifying that supplier base, or we need to think about sending one or two analysts out there to really review their cybersecurity capability and readiness. And if they're not where we need them to be, then maybe we need to think about some other options out there. So that's just kind of one example of that culture and why people are the most important aspect of doing this.
To kind of explore the conversation around the CI/CD pipeline scrubbing that you kind of mentioned there, is there any way we can kind of elaborate on that?
It's something that I've learned quite a bit about just over the past 6 months. Software's never really been my strongest area, so I'm playing catch up on that. Um, the beginning part is just making sure that your software developers have some basic training on how vulnerabilities get created and what their part is in trying to prevent that. Giving them training on the OWASP top 10 and putting them through some secure coding e-learning. And that's just kind of the initial thing that really doesn't cost very much money, is making sure that you've got some basic training and education for those people. And then there's a technology aspect of it too, about running the code through these static and dynamic analysis engines. And I think a lot of that technology has come a long way in the past year or two, and we've got to keep doing that. I mean, if you look at the likelihood of how you're going to get hacked, it's very likely the vector is going to be exploitation of a vulnerability. It's going to be social engineering, probably a component of it, and then the other component is going to be exploitation of a technical vulnerability. And how do we reduce the number of those that are available and out there? Well, we need to do a better job at software development. And I kind of like that CMMC really kind of brought that up and brought it into focus, talking about having a software bomb, knowing where these things come from, making sure that if a developer goes out and downloads a chunk of code that's open source, or just sitting out there on Pastebin or something, you need to understand that you still got to check through that stuff, and you got to run it through the analysis engines before it makes it into the final product.
There should absolutely, your developers absolutely need to be trained. And another piece of that is having the code scanning and app scanning, and that's before it goes into production. Just as much analysis on that code that you can do, just because, I mean, even training the developers, it's easy to have little holes in there. So
yeah, on the procurement side too, like, we got to pay better attention to that. Even when you're buying software from a very large company, it's very reputable, you just got to, your supplier risk management team's got to ask those questions. Hey, Mr. Vendor, whoever it is, even if they're huge, what are you doing for this? And there's so many smaller companies out there that are innovating and building all these great things that the business wants and needs. And I get it, but you gotta check with these companies and see, well, what are you doing here? There's a security risk to it, but also a business continuity risk. If somebody goes out and buys one of these things in their business unit, they could very quickly to become super dependent on it. And so even if they have a security incident on their side and they're providing some SaaS solution to us, is that going to immediately cause a business interruption for us? And so that part's really important to me, on the third party risk management side.
I got a note here to say, because Dev thinks the security will slow them down, key is implementing a solution that will work behind the scenes without slowing the development efforts. The more progressive companies are implementing a DevSecOps environment.
yep, that's absolutely true.
Yeah, I think I had a conversation with a manager or director that was in the software team, and they brought me a concern about how long these scans were taking, and I'm like, well, how long are we talking about? And I was expecting them to say, well, like 18 hours or something, and it was like 30 minutes. I don't know, that seems pretty fast to me. Like, how fast are you needing it to be? And so we need to make sure we're communicating with those folks to be like, well, talk to me about your existing process, and where do we need to do this scanning technology so that we can minimize the disruption or interruption in your development cycle. Every company probably, has something a little bit different. And so if they can't tolerate a 30-minute scan, okay, well, what if, when do your people work? Well, first shift, second shift. Okay, let's just do those on third shift when nobody's working anyway, and bring it back then. Or, based on kind of their build schedule, let's just make sure we're doing it, 48 hours before, your build cycle needs to complete. So that's that process analysis I mentioned at the beginning of this. You gotta analyze those existing processes and figure out like where's the right time to do this, or did we pick the wrong technology? Do we need to go look at some other stuff out there, or just go back to your vendor and say, well, bring some of your best practices to us to figure out how we can shorten these cycle times. And because if you don't make those folks happy with what you're trying to do, they will find a way to circumvent it and go around it anyway and get their work done. And so that's where you got to try and put this thing together in a way that can allow them to continue to meet their own objectives.
Yeah, and that was always one of the biggest challenges with me in cybersecurity was, where do you draw the line with security and operations? So you can always there's always more security you can do. There's always something else, but the more you implement, it's going to be expensive and it's going to be restrictive on an operational side. So it's just finding that fine balance of security and operations.
I guess I'll just elaborate on what John was saying about the balance. I've always believed for many, many years that security has got to be in balance with the business and with IT and with the other stakeholders in the company. Obviously, there's a risk element to that. If you're defense industrial base, then we're going to need to be a bit more heavy-handed because the risks are so high. If you've got intellectual property that you're developing in China, we need to be really serious about that and put a big investment into protecting that kind of stuff. But everything needs to be in balance with the resources that are available, what the business is willing to tolerate in terms of interruption and disruption to what they're trying to get done and meeting their objectives, but also what their risk appetite is. And there's all of these different things that as security leaders we're trying to balance. And that's always been a key goal for me professionally, to try and get that balance and that harmony in place. And hopefully do so in a cost-effective way. And it's doable. But you got to be really strategic about it. That goes back to the earlier topic. You got to be really strategic, and you got to communicate with people, and it is possible to get there with a great team behind you. And that's, I'll close it with that, just saying I've worked with a lot of really awesome teams. I've been privileged to lead a couple of these operations. And I've just a lot of great people, and that's what it takes. I can't do it on my own. John can't either, and we need the support of a great team. So if you're thinking about getting into cybersecurity or information security and you're listening to this, just keep at it. We need lots of people, and we will for a very long time. So just keep at it, and we need the support of everybody.
All right, John, any final thoughts here?
No, I think Brad did a really good job summing it up. Yeah.
Thank you for joining EITS, the Cyber Ninjas, for the first recording of CISO Roundtables, Tales from the Trenches. We hope that you will join us for next month's episode, where we'll be discussing the topics of women in cybersecurity, hosted by our very own Chief Operations Officer, Jane Bradshaw.